Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dr. Brittany Jacobs. I am the chair of the Sport Management and Esport programs here at American Public University System. On behalf of the American Public University System and Policy Studies Organization, we are so excited to welcome you to the inaugural Sport United Conference on Sport Management and Esport. We have 2 full days of phenomenal presentations ahead, so we hope that you'll join as many as you can. The full event schedule, everything that's going on over the course of the next 2 days can be found on Whova. That includes presentations, presenters, all of the tracks, and all of those streaming links as well. Just a little bit of information about the presentations for today. During the presentations, you'll have the opportunity to add information into the chat and into the Q&A session. So please engage with these presenters. As Paul and I were speaking earlier, it can be a little bit awkward just to be speaking to a blank room or feel like you're speaking to a blank room. So please engage with us and engage with the presenters. This morning, we're going to kick off the conference with our keynote speaker, Paul Rabel. Paul is a former lacrosse player and the co-founder of Premier Lacrosse League, PLL. You've probably heard of it. It is a professional league that launched in October of 2018 with 100 of the best players in the world. In 2020, Paul led the merger of the MLL and PLL, growing that league from 6 teams to 8 teams. Those teams now tour major market cities. In 2022, Paul inked a multi-year media rights deal with ESPN. So as you can see from his background as a professional lacrosse player, now transitioning into the sport business realm, Paul is absolutely an expert in this area. So I'll turn it over to Paul for his keynote on the evolution of pro sports, a modern media, commercial, real estate, and DTC business.
Thank you, Brittany. Can buy a show a thumbs up maybe, because I can't see anyone else, or fireworks. Is my audio good? Okay,
Yes.
good, great, okay. All right. I'm looking forward to talking to everyone about this, I think, like pretty complex theme, which I was sent, called Sport Continues to Evolve at a Rapid Rate with the Redistribution of Conferences, Redefinition of Amateurism, Expansion Development of Leagues, which I can talk quite a bit about, and the influence of tech, AI, and new media. So as I sit here on a Zoom and minimize my self view because it's horribly distracting. By the way, Zooms tend to be pretty difficult, awkward, and what have you. I have struggled in the past, especially giving a talk, of which I'd love to engage with you all on. So an engagement-less version. However, I've prepared some notes via questions that I asked myself around the theme, such that I can deliver to you guys most of what I know about professional sports and youth sports, and you can feel enabled to connect the dots in ways that fit whatever it is that you do. So here are the questions that I wrote down. Why does more and more money pour into sports? Why are professional sports teams and leagues trading at such high multiples? What's going to happen to youth sports? And how does technology and new media impact teams and leagues? I think that should cover most of it. So let's start at the top, which, why does more and more money pour into sports? And here's what I'll start off by saying. Typically, high return capital goes into new technology, and that capital often attempts to be a part of the next rocket ship. Apple, Uber, Airbnb, Google, like 140 times return businesses. And as my mentor often tells me, assume you're not that. The next up, often invested into sector companies, are consumer brands, real estate, financial services, hospitality. But each of these asset classes typically have 1 or 2 revenue streams at most. And those that do are considered asset classes with diverse revenue, which takes me to sports. I think the asset class with the most diversity in revenue, streams and operations, plus some intangibles that we'll get into when I touch on valuations, is in the sports industry. So how did we get here? Pro sports in America used to be a player part-time civic center community-based relationship. Take Major League Baseball in the 1900s. This was a print and radio business. This was pre-television, and it was a ticketing business. So the more games you had, the more tickets you could sell and the more revenue you could generate. Hence, baseball having 162 games in a year. The NFL struggled through most of the early 1900s. They used to compete with the AFL, and they have a 16-game regular season because it's full contact. So they don't have what we call in our business the tonnage until the advent of TV. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on tickets because it's pretty direct revenue. You guys understand number of games, number of seats. It's what I'd say capped revenue. And every team knows the upside, depending if they have luxury suites and such, and the downside. So there is certainly things like flex ticket offering prices and scenarios like that, but let's move to the more juicy stuff. Tickets, though, is revenue stream number one. Television and the NFL, they were first to structure a media rights relationship with a network, and that opened up a massive new revenue stream in this business model that we all talk about today. And this is also where Major League Baseball missed. Major League Baseball is considered America's pastime, and it wasn't until really the late 80s, but it was this moment when the NFL jumped into TV that they began to take the lead in America, and they are the juggernaut that we all know them to be today. Major League Baseball missed because they had that big tonnage platform, 162 games. They were highly dependent on tickets, and I'll get to another revenue stream that they're dependent on. And they worried that TV would pull from attendance. As a side note, this is where blackouts were introduced. So if you are local to the Washington Commanders, the NFL actually structured in a blackout rule years ago. It's since changed, but if the stadium didn't get to 95% capacity, then the local station that you were watching the Commanders game on would black out. You couldn't watch it. So it was a relationship that property structured with networks to ensure that attendance was still the focus in those markets before the live game was offered on TV. But that was an aside. The NFL's first deal was in 1962 with CBS. It was a 2-year deal valued at $4.65 million. So they were basically getting two and some change a year, $2 million. Today, the NFL, as we all know, continues to lead media rights valuations. And their latest deal across all broadcast networks, so the big four, including Amazon and now Netflix, helps them achieve over $11 billion a year for the league. And that's a 10-year term with an opt-out in year 7. So that first deal, 2-year, 4.65 to now 10-year, $111 billion deal is pretty amazing. We'll jump into the details in a little bit. Now, leagues began developing what would today become that primary revenue source, but on the heels of television and sports. By the way, for the networks, that's a model that relies on affiliate fees and advertising. Affiliate fees are what the cable service providers pay on a per sub basis to, say, ESPN, and why it's important for ESPN to have the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, the PLL, and why the market is wondering how the MVPDs, cable service providers like Spectrum and Charter, are going to lower their affiliate fee deal to someone like Warner Brothers, who just lost the NBA next season, because that has an impact on how much a network is getting paid on a per subscriber basis. The other one's advertising, which I'm going to jump into now. The first lucrative sponsorships in sports, they were the third biggest revenue stream at the time. Now they're the second on average. The NFL does $2 billion a year in sponsorship. And Fox just announced that they've sold out of TV spots and dots. We call them spots and dots, but 30-second ads for the upcoming Super Bowl for a measly $7 million per 30 seconds. So if you think about, thank you for that laugh. It's quite nice to hear. So if we think about sponsorship in sports, brands come in directly through the league. They come in at the local level through the teams, and they go in with the network. A lot of leagues create a symbiotic relationship where if Pepsi comes in and spends with the NFL allocates, call it $40 million to their network partners. And then the teams can cut local bottling distribution deals with other Pepsi providers, and so on and so forth. So all that is structured in an agreement between the trade associations, so the league and the teams, and how they divide revenue. Let's talk about more revenue streams. How else could these leagues monetize with a live product We've talked about tickets, TV, and sponsorship. Let's cut to licensing. Um, the first merch deals, as I had mentioned, were in baseball in the 20s. But the NFL was the first to structure a licensing deal with third parties. And frankly, it's not always the leagues. There was this basketball player named Michael who came along out of University of North Carolina and decided to partner with Nike and unlock merchandise sales via sports in a way that none of us ever would have expected, where sponsorship dollars now drive through player upward to team, upward to league, into network on a spot and dot that Fox is able to sell for $7 million for 30 seconds. But Michael Jordan, like Bo Jackson, and now it's pretty commonplace for athletes all over the world representing their disciplines to get sponsorship dollars and structure licensing deals. And the difference between sponsorship and licensing would be Pepsi paying the NFL for the official drink category partner. And then a licensing deal might get added to that agreement where the NFL allows Pepsi to use their team marks with their local distributors, so that you might have a New York Giants helmet against your Pepsi can when you are at a 7-Eleven in northern New Jersey. And that's a pretty massive business. Okay, so those are essentially four major businesses that sit under the umbrella of sports leagues or teams. And for the fifth one, I want to head over to Europe for a moment to talk about what's now a lucrative model and has evolved in the 21st century. But our fifth major revenue stream in professional sports is actually youth sports. And it was Barcelona Football Club that built the first youth academy. But their academy was structured as a feeder system to acquire top talent. Whereas leagues today, whether it's what we do at the PLL with our boys and girls youth businesses that span camps, clinics, tournaments, leagues, club and rec globally. We operate in Australia and Japan and the UK, and then obviously all over North America. Or something like NFL flag football or MLS academies. These businesses, they leverage hard-fought IP and shared resources to drive a lot of revenue. I can't believe I'm still on the first question. So history has brought us to a place to show you that pro sports teams and leagues are much more than businesses on the field or the court. These are enterprise businesses that have diverse revenue streams that encapsulate tickets, media, sponsorship, merchandise, and youth all in one. Okay, question number 2. Why are professional sports teams and leagues trading at such high multiples? So with the diverse revenue streams behind us, we're mostly behind us because I'm going to add a very expensive sixth revenue stream. And it's non-traditional in pro sports, meaning not all of them have it, but it's an enterprise value. And then discuss valuations, because the sixth one has a major role in what I'm seeing. And the sixth one is real estate. Anybody know, actually, let me try this. Via the chat, which I'm looking in now. Hello, everyone from everywhere. Can anyone type in the Philadelphia baseball team? What is the name of that team in Philadelphia? Any locals to Philly? Yeah, quick one. The Phillies. Yes. The Philadelphia Major League Baseball team that I'm going to talk about, though, is the Athletics. And they're sort of related to the Oakland A's because the ownership group went from Philly to Kansas City to Oakland, and I think now it's Las Vegas. But anyway, in 1909, the Philadelphia Athletics were the first ballpark. They built it from concrete. They seated 23,000 fans and offered press boxes for media coverage, which again was your editorial writers and radio hosts, and then premium seating. It cost $500,000 to build at the time, which, if we adjust for inflation, it seems like a very triggering word right now. But if we adjust for inflation, that would be $14 million today. Not sure pro sports at the time knew the gold mine they were sitting on, as the Philadelphia Athletics were valued at a whopping $100,000 to $150,000. So cut to one of the most modern and cutting edge sports venues and experiences in the world. For those of you that are in Los Angeles or on the West Coast, that is SoFi Stadium. It's home of the LA Rams and where the LA Chargers in the NFL rent. They pay rent. The owner of that is Stan Kroenke. And that venue sits 100,000 people. It has a 70,000 foot wraparound 4K video screen. It hosts concerts, international soccer matches, major events like the Eras Tour, the Super Bowl, College Football Playoff Championship, and the upcoming 2028 LA Olympic Games. The all-in cost for this stadium was $5 billion. So without becoming a real estate class, there's two notes that I want to call out. The first is owners are sharp in their analysis with public and private financing. So these stadiums triple as civic centers, tourism sites, and job creators. Most teams that are building new stadiums on average are finding upwards of 60% of their financing through the public sector, which helps them with their IRR. I did take several real estate classes in college, and I interned at a commercial real estate developer that was actually early in on these sports winged facilities. And what I learned was an acronym called a TIF, but it's tax increment financing, where these team owners will go to the city and say, look how much value that we can create from a job standpoint, from a tourism dollars, beds and heads in tourism is what you call it to hotels. And there's various other ways that they justify how much new revenue it will bring to the city based on where the revenue sits at the city level, and that delta they get contributed in the form of a tax relief or tax refund or tax credit. And so that's the public financing side of it. Here's part two, though. Stadiums help valuations surge. So the LA Raiders, I'm so confused by all these. There's the LA Las Vegas Raiders. Yeah, went from the Oakland Raiders, poor teams in Oakland. Even Oakland couldn't hold on to the Golden State Warriors, could they? Anyway, I love Oakland. The Las Vegas Raiders were valued at $1.4 billion in 2016. They built a stadium, and now they're worth $6 billion. So additional revenue streams come from owning real estate, which again isn't rocket science like ticket sales. The nearest example I think about is with what the Crafts built in New England. The Crafts are investors in my league at the PLL. It's one Patriot Place, so it's not just Gillette Stadium. It's this wraparound mixed use from hotels like the Renaissance Hotel to all these retailers, including restaurants and a Vineyard Vines. So they become landlords as well. Okay, that's real estate. So let's get into the juice of valuation. I want to talk first about an LTV. So that's an investor acronym for the lifetime value of your customer. And if you think about consumer brands or software businesses, what they try to do at first as founders is create product market fit, where they go, okay, we have enough sample size of an audience that needs this product and it's helping them solve for a challenge. Cool. Then what they want to do is they want to grow their customer base. So what they try to do is math around it, and you build cost to acquire a customer. It's called your CAC, CAC. And then you try to figure out how much on average your customer is worth. And you tie that, especially if you're a subscription business or a business that can offer multiple purchases over time, how long they'll be with you and how much revenue they'll generate with you over that time. That's your lifetime value. And so then you go back to your investors and you go, our LTV is on average $100 per customer, and it costs us $30 to acquire them. Cool. Let's spend like hell because we're going to make $70 on every $30 we spend. The LTV in sports is insane. We call it 30 plus years. Many of us who are sports fans, we arrived at that either through our own relationship through our friends' relationship, through our parents' relationship, through the market that we live in, through, an unlock, like going to a Super Bowl party. And then now more recently with social media, where I know some avid sports fans of the Golden State Warriors who go to no games during the NBA season, but are considered avid because they love Steph Curry and they follow Steph and Aisha on Instagram. Okay, that's an LTV. That's really important to investors, and they love that part because you tie the LTV across all those revenue streams that we've talked about, and you have a big business. Pro sports is also a scarcity business. So the great Warren Buffett calls businesses with economic moats, let's say economic floats, economic moats, or what I would say is monopolies or monopolistic businesses. You've got this in sports, undisputed best-in-class performers. And they, in a lot of cases, represent us in our communities. And you layer that on with an element of scarcity because our seasons or our campaigns are seasonal. So you don't get it year round, and there's this buildup. By the way, side note is I know we live in a world of capitalism that romanticizes data. And I want to say that despite talking about a lot of data up to this point, I don't believe that it's the golden calf in business. I think that sports and a lot of sectors, including politics, is about storytelling. But I call sports fans equal parts, sort of logic thinking and romantically thinking. They're driven by emotion and instinct. So our ability to storytell or compel an audience, engage fans, and leave them wanting more. I remember Ted Leonsis, who owns Monumental Sports, so the Capitals, the Wizards, the Mystics, Verizon Center, all in DC. He told me that sports is the best form of original content because nobody knows what's going to happen. It's a great business if you can get in, which is back to what Warren Buffett said around the moats. If you have the NFL, i.e., or spring football, which one's more valuable? And it's not even fucking close because the NFL is best in class. And all of those roads lead to valuations that are coming in at 8 to 11 times revenue, not EBITDA or profits. They're valued on revenue. Okay. I have not been paying attention to the time. I suspect that I'm getting close, but I think we have 2 questions left that I want to go through. The first is what's going to happen to youth sports. So I'll talk a little history first. In the 90s, 45 million kids played youth sports in the US. It was less tracked formally than it is today, but it was mostly community-based programs run by schools, local clubs, rec centers. Today, participation much better documented, but is down to roughly 36 million kids. That's according to Aspen Institute's Project Play. And the decline, I think, is attributed to several factors: the rise of specialization, increased cost. There are concerns about injury, especially concussions in a massive sport like youth football. And there's a shift in youth interest towards tech and non-physical play. The bottom line is, and this is what I hate about youth sports, is that the growing professionalization of youth sports has created barriers for low-income families, and that impacts overall participation. Nelson Mandela, ran his political campaign connecting it, or metaphorically tying to sport as being ultimately egalitarian, so long as access is equal to sport. In the 90s, well, before I even jump to that, so we talked about participation down. And on the other side of participation, there is, wait for it, money. In the 90s, youth sports was about a $5 billion industry. Today, with fewer people playing, it's a $25 billion industry. Specialized training academies, travel leagues, high-end tournaments, sports tech. And then there's this, going back to the romance side of it, there's this really intense focus on college scholarships and professional pathways. I didn't feel that when I was younger. For those of you that are playing youth sports now or in high school and college, I'm curious what your experience in your household was. In other words, for me, the expectation that you would get a Division I scholarship in any sport was so rare. And if you had a kid at your school, even if it was a public school in Montgomery County, Maryland, that had 4,000 kids in it, and Coach K, or at the time Dean Smith, came walking through those doors to watch one of your basketball players, man, the place shut down. Now it feels like if you play a sport, you're expecting that. It's a strange thing. But it's also why, from a psychology standpoint, I think households are okay with spending so much for their kids on sports. So what can we do? I think there's a couple of options, at least that we're actively pursuing at the PLL. The first is that pro leagues invest in youth sports, and they should be doing more of it. I think it's the best integrative platform to do so because we have the strongest IP. We can lower the price point. Frankly, like our view is like we can run youth break even businesses, and that's justified through if you grow participation by lowering the price point. What you're also building with these young girls and boys running around with league IP is a lower funnel fan conversion to ticket sales, viewership, and merchandise to our main thing or main things of pro sports leagues and teams, which is their games. And then the second path is lobbying through public relations, a revisitation for public investment back into sports. Which, by the way, if you think about expensive sports, they're equipment based. So lacrosse, hockey, golf. The benefit that we have in lacrosse versus hockey and golf is we don't have to pay for ice time or tee times. The fourth one, the one I didn't mention, is football, American football. Helmets are expensive, shoulder pads are expensive, thigh pads are expensive. But when we played Pee Wee football, we were given our equipment for free, or there were loaners. And that's because some presidents in the early 1900s loved American football, and they pushed their local government to subsidize equipment for us. So it created that egalitarian approach. Football otherwise would be expensive. You think about the 40s and 50s, most of the universities that were winning national championships were Ivy League institutions. Okay, there's a third option. I think it's a balanced one. In a pro business world, just recognizing that there are people that want to pay for premium and exclusive content or experiences. You should offer that, and that's privatized youth sports. But the other needs to be developed or redeveloped, and that would offer optionality. So I think for every club organization I'd like to see at least 3 rec programs. There's a Titleist Sports Performance Institute study that I like to think about and talk about, and it tells me why kids churn and they stop playing sports. Number one, they're not having fun. Number two, they're outskilled. Number three, they're outsized. Not having fun has to do with, I think, the community element. Are you playing with your friends? Do you like your coach? Is it a good coach? Outskilled tied back to coach. Outsized tied back to governance. Like we put kids together based on their age, but as we all know, we develop at different paces, and so it should put kids together based on their size and skill, and if they want to with their friends. Not every youth sports program should be coached by Bob Knight and with the intent of getting every kid on that fucking roster a Division I scholarship to Indiana basketball. The new element that I think about, not included in this Titleist Sports Institute, is how rec sports brand has changed. It's really unfortunate. It's considered uncool by teenagers. So if they see their buddies playing for the club program and they can't play for that program because either their parents or family can't afford it, or they're not good enough, the resort is playing for the local team, but rec sports have lost its way. So that's also why I want leagues to invest, because we can change IP of a rec game, like the Little League World Series has branded rec baseball, and Pop Warner football has branded rec football in cool ways that still make it very appealing. Okay, that's youth. Now, the last one that I want to talk about is how does technology and new media impact leagues and teams? And I like this question because it's essentially what was on the first page of our offering memorandum in our first round of financing for the Premier Lacrosse League. It's plain and simple. We wouldn't have been able to raise the capital we did with the goals and ambition that we had, should it not been for new technology and new media. Let's take the UFC and MLS, for example. So the UFC in the 90s were digging itself deeper and deeper into debt. The Fertitta brothers, who bought the league under Dana White's guidance for $2 million, were in the hole $40 million. despite frankly a really attractive model. Like I love individual sports leagues because the costs are lower to run it. You have a prize purse, versus in team sports, you're paying players who don't step on the field via practice rosters and even on the sideline. So the winners get paid. And then it's sort of like running a movie theater or a car wash where you're going to know you're going to have revenue coming in the door that you're using via that purse to pay back your talent. And the revenue also through pay-per-views was built back in the boxing age, which is a really attractive viewership model. Nonetheless, here's what Dana White was able to convince the Fertitta brothers to do: invest another $10 million a year on their Spike TV show that they produced and marketed out of their own pockets, did a time buy with Spike TV. So different than what I talked about in media rights with the NFL. And that put them further in a hole, but dug them out of it. And they escaped as storytellers and also building stars. The MLS WNBA, three iterations of women's soccer, which is now the NWSL. They had to fight in the conundrum of traditional sports media and out-of-home marketing costs to gain viewers and ticket purchasers. So the conundrum was that linear television was the anchor at the time, not streaming. And with limited inventory, that's often booked 2 years in advance by the network programmers, and availability for only proven ratings. As we discussed earlier on the side of TV contracts, it takes a while to build an audience. So the revenue was a slow trickle for these leagues because they were asked to come in with an unproven rating. And so what's the chicken or the egg? Someone has to take the bet. It's hard. Again, going back to the PLL, we didn't have that problem. So let's talk about what our beliefs were. We had a sport with product market fit, going back to an investor's mindset, but it was lacking a real pro league. So why do we have product market fit? It's the first game of North America. It was played thousands of years ago by Native Americans. The intention of Native American players, several of which have been our MVPs in the PLL, was to share the game with the masses. They did so with French Canadians in the mid 1800s and collectively built the modern rule book of lacrosse. Then they went and toured in the UK and played in front of Queen Victoria in the late 1800s. It was an Olympic sport in 1904 and 1908. University sports since the 1800s. Youth participation trends are up year over year over the last 25 years. States have unlocked public dollars to play varsity high school programs. So it's not just a Northeast sport anymore, and countries have ticked up in participation. When I started in the late 90s, there were 18 countries that were playing. Today, there are 92, and we're back in the Olympics come LA 2028. So why hadn't pro lacrosse worked? Various reasons. I'm going to skip that part because I think I'm running out of time. But here's why we were going to make it work today. Number one, new media. The advent of streaming put us in a position where we can make a new bet with a network, and that was attractive to them. And we could drive marketing through this thing called social media, which was way less expensive than out-of-home marketing, which is just signage and on-site activations and things that are more difficult to track. Unique streaming subs gave us the data to enforce that our audience was digitally native. We have a young audience, and that's really attractive to older networks. We were the first to simulcast. So when we cut our deal with NBC, they gave us 16 broadcast windows, and then all of our games were simulcasted on NBC Gold at the time. This is pre-Peacock. And so we had our own Gold streamer. That's how we were to pull our own data. And we would play games at the same time so we could learn around utilization rates. Fans, let me say this. Another area that we learned is that when streaming happened, especially on the entertainment side, it was DVR, on-demand streaming. It shifted the paradigm where we could pay essentially a tax in the form of subscription fee to not be served ads so we could watch what HBO had really kicked off in The Sopranos, but we can now watch Friends in The Office without ads. And so when sports got into streaming, we go, cool, people are paying a tax in the form of a subscription fee, and we're not going to serve them ads. So we're going to stay in the huddles during timeouts and quarter breaks, and they wanted to be served ads. So that's led to a market that's really attractive for streamers. And look no further than the NFL Netflix deal, where they're paying the NFL $175 million for a Christmas Day game, which to me tells me, all right, Netflix has 282 million subs globally. They're trying to build their ad business. 40 million of that 282 are ad tier. That's about a $500 million business. They want to make it 4 billion. So what are they going to do to drive advertisers? They're going to bring in live events because with an NFL game that 282 million people globally can watch, they have no choice but to see ads because of the TV timeouts and quarter breaks and coaches challenges. So if you are on their corp dev team or programming team and you're looking at the next Ridley Scott film that's going to cost you $175 million, or an NFL game that costs you the same, you're going to go with the NFL because you're going to onboard subscribers in both scenarios, but you're going to tack on ads to the NFL game, not to the next Ridley Scott film. Sorry for those of you out there that are going to watch Gladiator 2. I am as well. Okay, revenue, technology. The principles of pro sports, I think, as we discussed, were most often tied to game days. And with technology, you could take your programming year round. So businesses like Ticketmaster and SeatGeek have created advantages for properties to sell tickets more seamlessly and quickly. There's direct to garment and merchandise, which is essentially leagues and businesses' ability to capture moments and flip a t-shirt for sale overnight, and you can buy it and it'll take maybe 2 weeks to ship. That's direct to garment. Quality is a little shittier. Fast fashion has also been updated with technology. Conversation and marketing has been updated with technology. Sports betting has absolutely surged in America, both from a legislation standpoint, but also technology. This approach we call content to commerce. So among new media and tech, we were able to lift off much faster than our predecessors did. And it's not just pro lacrosse history, but all the groups that I just mentioned. That's why I mentioned them. Our pitch to investors was we can do what the UFC and MLS did in 25 years in half the amount of time. That's why. There's other things that we do. We offer a wholly owned model. We're a tour-based model like F1. We launch new properties like our championship series in street lacrosse. We bid and got us back into the Olympics. We have our own documentary on Hulu and Disney Plus and ESPN Plus called Fate of a Sport, so on and so forth. That, for those of you who stuck around, is my TED Talk on why pro sports works. Shall we move to questions?
Absolutely. That was awesome. Thank you, Paul. All right, I have a few questions here for you. The first one is, how has media changed the way that pro sports engages with those fans?
Well, it's changed it in a lot of ways. Maybe I'll jump into one that I haven't explained yet. So the first is the aggregate. So the NFL, well, let me say this. Major League Baseball was notoriously known for a broad legal team that would go after anyone who was redistributing Major League Baseball games or IP. So they shut it all down. And the NBA said, House of Highlights, Bleacher, these groups that are promoting NBA highlights, it's actually good from an aggregate, and we believe that it's going to drive more viewership to television and make us more culturally relevant. That bet that Adam Silver made, I think, was the right one. But where they're at now, despite getting like a 2.7x valuation, and Adam Silver, I think, is the best commissioner in sports, what is like, okay, we get, call it 1 million, 1.5 million viewers on broadcast. We think, though, that there's 10 to 20 million views of those games that gets redistributed on social or other means. So how are we aggregating that and monetizing? I think that's a challenge for a lot of leagues, is figuring out how to monetize on what I had called, cheaper marketing than out of home, and i.e. social media. The other thing that I would say is it's created a new landscape for emerging leagues and teams to be able to run faster and cover more ground than their peers could 20 years ago. I can't stress enough the cap and the importance of that cap of inventory when we lived in a monolithic era of television consumption. That doesn't exist anymore. However, you still have to put on an absolutely kick-ass product because discovery is more difficult than it was during the monolithic era. I'll give you one more. An example is, it ties like all that question into the LTV component. So entertainment executives or research and analysts would look at a new show, and you guys remember pilots? Pilots existed at one point. Uh, Before you greenlit a series, you would make sure the pilot works. So what you would do is you would run that pilot on the heels of a proven program. And if the pilot held 80% of the prior program's audience, it would get greenlit. Now, entertainment is a lot easier to make that assumption against because they have hooks. And if a show doesn't hook us in the first 5 minutes, we flip. In sports, it's harder because you're running the risk of not knowing what the hell you're watching from a new discipline standpoint. Do you even know the players? Is the teams that are playing representing your market, et cetera, et cetera? So it takes longer to hold that fan, and network executives know that. Um, but on the flip side of it, your LTV is far greater, 30 plus years than Breaking Bad 6 seasons. Was it 6 seasons or five? Fantastic show. But the Seinfeld double pilot was put up against the Cheers finale. It was watched by 93 million people. Insane. So it's like records show how popular Seinfeld was, whether you liked it or not. But what a liftoff they had. And so I use that because in the streaming world, you don't get those liftoffs. You're just targeting your fan base. You don't have a lead in. You're just going right on, clicking your smart TV and going to the show and watching it. That's really, really important to understand.
That's great. I want to call out one thing from the chat. Peyton said that they played lacrosse in college and they agreed. They felt very expected to go D1. And once one athlete did it, they felt like the expectations got even higher.
Yeah, it's crazy. I feel for the younger generation that's playing sports. Like there's a saying I heard recently called commit and quit. And I think it's all tied, all like roads lead to the evil social media age that we're in. Like there's some good things about social media, and we built our business leveraging. I gave one of those features as to what helped us raise money. But the addictiveness and the empty calories that are on there, and the false assumptions that are made, and the projections that are made, and so that commit and quit comes from how big it is in lacrosse. And I see it in basketball and others. When you make your commitment to play Kansas basketball, you do a collab post on your Instagram with Kansas basketball, and it's a cool picture of you, carousel with a highlight of you dunking. And then it makes, like social media does for a lot of teens, feel lesser than. And that becomes sort of the goal, not fucking playing because it's fun and you're building community and you're learning about leadership and collaboration. So I'm just lamenting, but I think that came from Peyton. Yeah.
I totally agree. Yes, I'm with you. We have one in the Q&A. This one says, any comments about the Cleveland Browns leaving Cleveland and moving to Brook Park?
Um, I'm curious. I'm actually curious. I wish we could bring you on stage. What you think? So that comes down to me for like one of those intersections of logic and financing for the organization, and then emotion and romance. I'd said for the fans, because like man, I remember from my friends. So I grew up in Montgomery County, and I was just outside of DC. So we were supporting Washington Commanders and the Washington. It was I think it was the Bullets at the time and the Wizards. And this was pre-Washington Nationals. So my taste of Baltimore was with the Orioles. My dad would take me to Baltimore Orioles games. And so I met a lot of Baltimore families, and they were just so devastated when the Colts left Indianapolis. It was like, oh, gutting. And that goes back to that LTV that I was talking about. But I don't have a take other than it's complex. And I know they're doing it from a financing standpoint. The venue is going to be better, much like what Stan Kroenke built in LA. But what do you think? What else
Well,
we got, Brittany?
yeah, I was going to say, we'll see if there's any responses in the chat to that, and I'll call them out if they do come. All right, this one comes from Steve. Steve says, given the importance of ratings and branding to the WNBA's revenue stream and future player and coaches' salaries, how is it possible that the powers of the league didn't have Caitlin Clark on the Olympic team?
Another romantic question. Because that was a coach's decision and an organization's decision. There's a lot that goes into that stuff, having played for 3 world teams. And look, there is explicit and implicit bias. There's confirmation bias. There's commercial bias. And then like the nuance of Olympics and even world championships, there's like, you know, if you're Spanish football, which is one of the greatest countries over the last 20 years in the FIFA World Cup, they tend to carry 1 to 2 veterans who have the experience from a leadership standpoint, along with the 19-year-old Lamine Yamal, who stunned everyone in his world-class play. So there's always a balance, and I think like from a player selection standpoint, I have my feelings like you do and like everyone else, and but having been on the inside of the locker room, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But what the coach would say is, look, we won by the skin of their teeth, but they won. And what the WNBA would say is, you missed a major commercial moment. That's my reaction to it. But largely, the Caitlin Clark hype, I believe, is not a moment, it's a movement. And she, like Steph Curry, like Michael Jordan, like Tiger Woods, like Serena Williams, like Muhammad Ali, the greats of the greats, those that have changed sports leagues and disciplines altogether. What we don't talk about, and I hear this from so many different investors, is like, oh, you need your drive to survive, or how are you building stars? You can't build a superstar unless they're kicking everyone's ass every night. Hard to do that in hockey. What made Wayne Gretzky and Lionel Messi so unique. It's hard to do in lacrosse as well, because the game is more difficult to have the ball in your stick as often as a basketball in hand, or in football, American football, the ball in the quarterback's cradle, or individual sports like the ones that I had mentioned. But if someone is consistently going out there and dropping 35 points and hitting threes at a 30% clip from the logo, that is going to build stardom. And then the leagues sure as hell be better to capitalize on that and drive media, marketing, branding, attention, so that the thing can go from here to there.
I couldn't agree more that it's a movement. All right, we have another question. This one comes from So Young. They say, thank you for the insights. How will U.S. sports leagues balance the need to cultivate a global fan base with the preservation of their unique domestic identity and culture, particularly in an era where digital platforms amplify both cultural exchange and nationalism?
Yeah, let me read that. Preservation of unique domestic identity. Culture, particularly in an area where digital platforms amplify both cultural exchange and nationalism. I'm thinking about the last note, where digital platforms amplify both cultural exchange and nationalism. So let me try to address this. So what's really attractive to the WWE and their Netflix deal is that Netflix is a global single source of truth, is what like the technologists or heads of products would say, in that it's a one-stop shop. I'm in the UK right now, and I can watch Netflix. When I'm in Spain or Paris, I can watch Netflix. When I'm in the US, I can watch Netflix. And when Mike Tyson fights Jake Paul in next Friday, we're all going to be watching it from around the world, or those that are actually interested in Mike Tyson knocking his head off his shoulders. So that is attractive to build a global audience, because outside of the US, it's really fucking hard. You have to structure unique network deals in different markets, and there's the political challenges, there's the economic features within each of these markets. So you typically do so by working with local crews who help you navigate the business. But you're absolutely right that for the NFL to grow, much like for Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon to grow, it's they got to go global, and that's why Roger Goodell continues to invest in more games in Europe and in Mexico, and why the NBA frankly, before Adam Silver was running the show, but he was the deputy commissioner for the late David Stern. But David Stern went into China and Europe not to grow the commercial business, but to develop the talent there such that when Yao Ming developed and came over and played in the NBA, there was a more authentic relationship. And that's where I'm trying to come to when you say digital platforms amplify both cultural exchange and nationalism, or take, Otani for the Dodgers. So what you get with these professional teams in America is the density of the fandom from a community standpoint. They love it. And like, similar to the question around the Cleveland Browns stadium shift, like when you're a fan of the Cleveland Browns or Cleveland Cavaliers, and your bosses, the owners, are going off and building the commercial business elsewhere, it doesn't really matter. You're still having a fantastic experience and you're rooting on your favorite players. So when it goes elsewhere, how do you get them to feel the same way? I love looking at the Premier League because you have like a dozen teams right in London that have global brands. And you're like, man, these are way smaller geo-fenced teams than what we have in America, tied to these 50 states and sometimes regionally, especially before the Carolina Panthers. Like at the time, the Washington Redskins, they covered Virginia, North Carolina, and potentially areas of Georgia before the Atlanta Falcons. So if you're not, and then you obviously have New York and LA with multiple teams in each of the disciplines in the city, and who you pick is unique there. So that is a wider answer maybe to a really good question, from a streaming standpoint, so technology and media, to the authentic path of leagues to working to develop international talent to come over and play. And then the last one is the focus of building global brands inside of your community. So think globally, act locally.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. So Young says 100% agreed regarding the meaningfulness of authentic relationship building. Thank you so much. And then we have a response here. Let me scroll up real quick. This one comes from Tatiana, and it's regarding the Browns and their relocation. They say the Browns looking to improve their revenue stream and with the chance to host a bigger game like the Super Bowl. So they're excited about that.
Yeah.
They did mention there will potentially be loss of revenue from the city of Cleveland as they move outside. They're interested to see how the fans in the city and everyone puts it to work.
Yeah, great answer.
All right. I think I have one more question for you, Paul. And then anybody else, if you have questions, throw them in the chat or in that Q&A, and we'll make sure to get them to Paul as well. Paul, talk to me a little bit about direct-to-consumer platforms. You mentioned, some of that fast fashion and things like that. How are we seeing those DTC models transform fan relationships?
Well, the fan relationship direct to consumer is, we talked about streaming, but I would come back to social, where you can interact year round with your audience. And in pro sports, we used to be a tonnage business, like the Major League Baseball, 162 games and a game day experience, and then people would move on. And what sports operators are looking to do is keep people in the family all year. And so you access D2C platforms to fulfill that. The other thing I would say, what's really attractive to investors and pro sports owners that are smart and not savagely selfish, is how athletes are becoming bigger and bigger celebrities, and sport is intersecting with culture and music and fashion and culinary, and has been for a while, but really is. I mean, like, if you think about an NBA courtside celebrity row, or if you think about, frankly, the division that the NFL launched called the Entertainment Marketing Division in the early 1990s with Don Garber before he went over to become the commissioner of MLS, and Constance Schwartz, who now runs Smack Entertainment. They brought Michael Jackson to the Super Bowl halftime show. And then they brought Snoop Dogg in to meet Roger Goodell to help invest in Snoop Dogg's youth football league. So constantly creating a cultural connection is what sports organizations do. Cut to today, I think this is going to be the first time. Maybe in the past, David Beckham co-chaired a Met Ball, but Anna Wintour, is like sort of like runs fashion globally still, and she has the Met Gala every May in at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and the co-chairs were always like designers and actors, sometimes musicians. Um, it's what they refer to in the fashion world as someone representing prestige. This coming year, of the four co-chairs, two of them are athletes, LeBron James and Lewis Hamilton. And then Jude Bellingham signed with Louis Vuitton as a brand ambassador, which again is like really rare, but to me shows that athletes are not only growing in their celebrity, but they're crossing over at the highest degree of difficulty, which is the fashion industry with the major fashion houses. And if owners are not selfish, okay, and I said because David Stern made the OG move in the 80s when the NBA had a terrible reputation, very little viewership, is to get behind Magic, Bird, then MJ. Even if that would cost the team and league money, because that major Nike deal that Michael Jordan signed with his agent, David Falk. If you're selfish as a sports owner, you're saying those are dollars out of our pocket that Nike should be paying us. But if you're playing the long game, you're going, hey, the bigger Michael Jordan gets, the bigger the NBA is going to get. That's what it takes. And the athletes, coming back to your question, Brittany, are direct to consumer more than the teams and leagues. They build a real relationship with their audience. Going back to my call around a few of my friends who consider themselves avid Golden State Warriors fans because they love Steph Curry and his wife Aisha. That and more.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. I think we have one more question, and this will probably be our final question. This one comes from Professor Jay Harmon. And the question is, what's the PLL's relationship like with native tribes in Canada and the US on representing the medicine game? Also, down here in South Florida, they play two sticks.
Yeah, it's great question. So just a few weeks ago, I was spending a week in the Onondaga Nation and the Six Nations. So the Haudenosaunee people were the creators of Tehonktik Wahes, is what they still call it, which means they bump hips. And that is the version of the game, the single stick, that we see today called lacrosse. And they still have a very spiritual relationship with the game. It's known as the creator's game. And yes, you refer to a version of it called the medicine game, which I'll get to in a second. But the creator's game was first played in the sky world between the winged animals and the four-legged animals. And that's a story that you're told when you're given a stick in your cradle and then you're buried with that stick in the grave. And you play on a native nation with various rules that are decided on before a match. It was played to solve conflict. It was played for exhibition purposes, and then it was played before Longhouse. And Longhouse is referred to as ceremony. And when you play Tehonktik Wahes before ceremony, that is considered medicine. And that is a really special thing for us as a league to continue to tell stories around, connect with our existing native players and former native players. We have a partnership with the Haudenosaunee National Development Team. And then we even work with a number of nations around the U.S. That play different versions of lacrosse. And that's critical for me because there has been just a really awful and difficult relationship, both educationally in America around the history of America and Native people, and also what we continue to learn more and more about, which is sort of like the abominations of the boarding school programs in Canada and in parts of the U.S. So that's where the medicine comes in. But the beauty in the relationship with the creator is that the game was intended to be shared. And Oren Lyons, who is a faith keeper and member of the UN and creator of the Haudenosaunee national team, is also an advisor at the PLL. He's a dear friend of mine. He's 84 now. But he's brilliant if you guys ever want to look him up on YouTube or anything like that.
Amazing. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time today. I think we are out of time. Just want to give you this shout out from Professor Jay Harmon. You are a great ambassador for such a beautiful game.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you guys. I appreciate it. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate your time.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.